Hello everybody, I'm Jeffrey, and this is another episode of AutoAlchemy. Today I am going to be channeling Pablo Picasso, who famously said, "Good artists borrow, great artists steal." Which means that I'm also going to be channeling Erik Thor, who recently released an awesome video where he answers the most Googled questions about his type. I really liked the idea, so it's mine now. Okay, but seriously, do check out the original video up here and show Erik some love. You've probably noticed that I've been somewhat MIA lately, so I'm hoping that this idea can just be something fun that will help me get back into the routine of content creation. Lately, I've had to do a little adjustment with my priorities because my workload outside of YouTube has just been brutal. Okay, little caveat here. You might want to be prepared for a little ENTP rambling along the lines of, well, that's really going to depend on what you mean by narcissistic. Anyway, off we go. Question number 1. Are ENTPs narcissistic? Well, that's really going to depend on what you mean by narcissistic, don't you think? So, I really don't like this question. The answer is obviously a huge no. Narcissism is a bad thing, and it would just be a little bit weird if one of the personality types consistently exhibited a particular trait. But maybe I'm being nitpicky. Maybe a more generous interpretation of the question would be, do ENTPs have a tendency or a stronger tendency than other types towards being narcissistic? I think the answer is still no, although I can understand where that question is coming from. In the objective personality system, for example, ENTPs are known as being self above tribe, so they're going to look to themselves as the final arbiter for deciding important matters in their life. Despite that, their primary fixation isn't narcissistic or even self-oriented. ENTPs are mainly fixated on systems and concepts and other abstractions. Now, to an outside observer, if you see someone who is living in this intuitive la-la land, then yeah, maybe they're going to seem a bit self-obsessed. But I'm a little bit optimistic and like to believe that all of that seemingly self-obsessed musing can ultimately lead to insights that might make the world easier for all of us to live in. There's another reason that ENTPs might seem narcissistic. ENTPs are going to bristle a lot whenever they encounter sensory control out in the world. For me, this translates into things like commuting or waiting in lines or paying bills or having to hold down a steady job. Now, I really doubt that there's anybody in the world who is absolutely in love with any of those things, but I do think that it tends to get under the skin of the ENTP a little bit more, and when we bristle, when we show that displeasure, it makes us look like we think we're the exception to the rule. No, you don't understand. I really can't stand it, and I don't want to be doing this. I should somehow be exempt from participating in life with all of its little restrictions. Next up, are ENTPs smart? I think that as a general rule, you could say sure, ENTPs are smart. Because we're often operating in this really broad, abstract plane, and then we're capable of applying the tools of logic to that, we can arrive at really unique insights or really startling conclusions that can have really broad implications. We also tend to be somewhat talented or gifted in many different areas. I myself feel like a jack of all trades, and I suppose the one drawback then is that this might not translate into intellect as people tend to think of it. For an ENTP, it can be hard to commit to one thing enough to begin operating at a genius level. Are ENTPs romantic? You know, this might be surprising, but I tend to think so. I think of myself as a very covert romantic. In the framework of typology, I tend to connect this with that third function, FE, which is sometimes called the hidden agenda function. There's some subconscious level at which I'm thinking, as long as I am badass and incredibly intelligent and figuring things out, then I will be rewarded with emotional warmth. I'm not saying that that is a reasonable assumption. I'm saying that it's a visceral thing. This is what it means to have a cognitive function preference. Somewhere in your body, you're acting out these assumptions that you don't even realize. So yeah, I think that ENTPs can be romantic, and I think that that's only enhanced by having NE as our first function. We're capable of thinking of so many unique expressions of that emotional warmth that other people might overlook. It's definitely going to be an unconventional form of romantic expression, but yeah, NE and FE operating in tandem, it's a good look. I will say that there's a chance or a danger that once the ENTP feels that he or she has secured the relationship, that the romance dwindles a little bit. That was definitely true for me in my first few relationships in high school. I couldn't quite accept that romance and love were an ongoing process, that they needed continual work. I wanted to disappear down some theoretical rabbit hole. So if you're an ENTP, please be wary of that possibility. Know that nothing in life is ever secure, and even if you are putting in the work, you could be doomed. Next up, are ENTPs loyal? So my question here is, loyal to what? I would say that most ENTPs are not blindly loyal to anything. I've had friends who wanted my unconditional support even as they were engaging in really repulsive activities. And I just couldn't put my stamp of approval on that. The same goes for any sort of intellectual obsessions or ideologies that we might be entertaining. We're going to push against those a little bit. We're going to dissect them and try to refine them. We don't take anything for granted, really. The flip side of that is that if a particular romantic partner or set of ideas are able to withstand that crucible of logical analysis, then yeah, loyalty is going to be warranted for sure. Next up, are ENTPs rare? I think that the conventional wisdom here would say that we are rare, and maybe that's true out in the external world, but I don't really see that checking out with my own experience. Maybe that's because I run around in a lot of digital circles where I'm more likely to encounter other ENTPs, but I think that there's an abundance of them online. I guess I would land on ENTPs are not a majority, but we're certainly not underrepresented in the world, and we make our presence known. Are ENTPs evil? Well, yeah. Are ENTPs selfish? I feel like I pretty much covered this one in the question about narcissism. I guess I'll add something about the introverted feeling blind spot. I think that there are times when we don't even realize we are being steered by some sort of unconscious emotional evaluation. Give me another one, Google. Are ENTPs impulsive? Yeah, I think that this is probably true. In my own life, I think that I'm reasonably impulsive, but I am also reasonable in my impulsivity. But I'm also not like in love with danger or the prospect of financial ruin. So my impulsivity is more like, I'm going to buy this book. I'm going to eat this muffin. I'm going to eat this second muffin. I'm going to eat this book. Are ENTPs sensitive? I think that we're surprisingly sensitive. Now let me try to unpack that using cognitive function dynamics. So in my own life, I experience myself as the person who is responsible for TI puzzling shiz out, for figuring out how things work, for knowing all of the reasons, all of the logic that form the matrix behind the scenes of the world. And as I mentioned before, I have this visceral expectation that as long as I do that well enough, people will love me and they will give me the warm and fuzzy hug that my FE hidden agenda is craving. But then here comes some ISTJ who is, in my mind, embodying this extroverted thinking critical parent archetype. And this ISTJ is like, no, no, no. That does not make any sense. That is not productive. That is not what any reasonable person would do. And then I feel hurt. It's like, you. I am the one who determines what's reasonable. I don't care about your shallow, materialistic way of making sense of the world. Believe it or not, your job is to love me. Grumble, grumble, grumble. Sulky child activated. All right, so that was the last question from Google. How does all of that match up with you or the ENTPs in your life? And do you guys have any questions about the ENTP experience? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you for tuning in, for subscribing, for liking the video. Jeffrey out. I'm gonna keep that because it was freaking hilarious.